You're listening to Music Tectonics.
How to scale up. Welcome back to Music Tectonics, where we go beneath the surface of music and tech. I'm your host, Dmitri. I'm also the founder and CEO of Rock, Paper, Scissors, the PR and marketing firm that specializes in music tech and innovation. During my career, we've handled PR for many companies that got acquired. We handled PR for CD Baby through their acquisition to Downtown Music. We handled PR for Louder right before they got acquired by Spotify. And I'll never forget the New York Times feature our team scored for Lyric Financial right before they got acquired as well. But we rarely get to hear from founders who've sold their companies to find out how it came to be, what it was like, what the valuation talks consist of, and how they feel once it's all said and done. On today's podcast, we present our recent conversation titled How I Sold It from the online seismic event that we held 2 weeks ago. Amazing insights from two industry veterans, Anthony Troiano, who sold Rumblefish to CESAC, and Jeff Ponchick, who sold Repost Network to SoundCloud. And by the way, you can attend our seismic events and be part of the conversation. It's like the podcast, but you're right there. So see the link in the show notes as we have a really exciting one coming up this month. Also on today's episode, we'll hear from startup Riff Raff about what they're building and what they're excited about. And finally, we'll share another PR tip from Rock, Paper, Scissors amazing publicist Emily Francis. It's going to be a good one, so buckle up. First, the news.
Rock, paper, scanner.
Hey, Trisha, we're back with the Rock, Paper, Scanner Roundup.
I know. It's great to be back.
Trisha Yeager, our Chief Strategy Officer, is here with us to catch up on some of the news.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in the world of music and beyond. So we're going to rush through a few interesting articles that we saw this past week and then talk a little bit more about a bigger picture story. So one thing that I saw that piqued my curiosity was YouTube's announcement of their $100 billion ad revenues, topping that number for the first time in Q4 of 2024. And the reason I thought this was interesting in a nutshell is how YouTube really seems to keep on growing. And we're seeing some maturation, some slowing growth in the world of music streaming, but not when we put YouTube in the mix. It's pretty interesting.
I caught that article as well, and I noticed kind of in the footnotes of it that YouTube unveiled new tools in 2024, including collaborative playlists and fan badges. It also launched a feature allowing users to search for songs by humming or singing or playing a tune directly into the app, so they don't have to use Shazam. You can go straight to YouTube. We also saw a note in that article that YouTube is the most frequently used service for consuming podcasts in the U.S., according to an Edison report. So, like you said, YouTube is not just a major player. They are still growing, and it'll be interesting to see where they fit. So that's a good first one to kick off with. I saw one in Complete Music Update called Congress Member Proposes Web Blocking to Protect Copyright's $2 trillion Impact on the U.S. And it's not one that I saw a lot of news about, but I thought it was just interesting because this is something that was attempted in 2012. Big tech is not in love with this because it can make it harder to get content out there. But with the growing value of copyright across multiple sectors, according to the article, U.S. GDP reached, I think it was $2,000 billion or something, 7.66% of the U.S. economy if you look at the value of copyright across the board in 2023.
Wow. And it's kind of wild that we're still talking about how to fight piracy.
And another good point about this is it's not necessarily all about blocking tech or making it harder for tech in the US, but also about piracy across the globe as well. So anyway, we don't have to spend too much time on it, but it was kind of interesting to see that something like that is still relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. So another interesting thing that happened in the government, well, there's lots of interesting things going on in the government, but the Copyright Office recently released its report on AI and the question of, is AI subject to copyright? So looking at an article from The Verge that summarizes this discussion and the report pretty well, and it says that The Copyright Office basically says no. If there isn't quote unquote human interaction involved in crafting a piece of a work, it cannot be copyrighted. So that's an interesting outcome. And it'll be interesting to see how we define the sort of what's the cutoff for the amount of human interaction. It's not just prompting. It can't just be because AI is human, right? So it'll be interesting to see how that gets played out, probably in the courts, about what can be copyrighted or not.
So before we move on to our big story, there were a couple other related stories. The one from Music Tech magazine: as AI fakes proliferate, we need to draw a clear distinction between human-made and music and AI-generated content. Kind of, it's almost like the survey side of the copyright story is, and the AI copyright stories there. There was a study they quoted from Music Magpie that estimates on YouTube alone there are already well over 1.5 million AI cover tracks. After analyzing the 1,500 top performing AI tracks, they found that Blackpink, Justin Bieber, and Kanye West were out in front as the most AI plagiarized artist, racking up over 33 million views. Talking about 10 million pounds in revenue lost to AI-generated content. But there was this Authority Hacker survey also that said 1,200 music consumers were surveyed and said things like 93% said they did not value AI-generated music as highly as music produced by humans. And other statistics that aren't that surprising. They said it was interesting that 89% of those surveyed want clear labeling for AI-produced music. And that's the part that I think was kind of interesting, is just like having the distinction, being able to know.
That is really interesting. Giving people just the heads up they want to know. But will they always know? The next article you picked out, Dmitri, really questions like, will we be able to tell if it isn't labeled?
Yeah, there's a Business Insider article about ByteDance's Omni-Human One showing just how realistic AI-generated deepfakes are getting. And I think, the point there is just it really is getting better and better in terms of what AI can produce that looks realistic. They demonstrate with TED Talks and with a talking Albert Einstein some of the scarily impressive, quote unquote, results have to do with the fact that the full body looks like it's in proportion and then it's responding the right way, not just the mouth pasted onto an egg or something.
and it doesn't have, the person doesn't have 7 fingers or something. And the question about deepfakes is going to get more and more subtle as these deepfakes get more convincing, in that I think we're also going to see more and more nuanced strategies for distributing deepfakes. So they're not like, we all know, if you have Albert Einstein talking about, I don't know, his favorite trap artist or something like that, we know that one's a fake, right? But just from context. But there's going to be some stuff, for instance, there's been a lot of reposts recently of videos that are generated by, for example, Russian propagandists that imply certain things about very specific in the weeds parts of the US government that are being spread around and used to justify certain actions. So those kind of really subtle things about seemingly deep in the weeds topics are where the deepfakes are going to get the most insidious. So, and that could apply to everything from basic science research to an artist interview with an up and coming artist whose career is tanked because they're seen as saying something they never said.
And even if the U.S. government decides TikTok, a Chinese company, can't be in America or can't be owned by a Chinese company while being in America, videos that are created by a deepfake platform that ByteDance owns are going to be a lot harder to stop. So those types of detection tools could be really valuable for that. And, the article even mentions some of the U.S. legislation like the Take It Down Act aimed to tackle deepfake porn, which can have drastic, dangerous impact on people's reputations. So yeah, anyway, we don't need to go too deep there, but it is interesting that while we're talking about these various Chinese apps getting taken away or getting added to and blowing up in American app stores, that ByteDance is part of this, one of the most realistic AI-generated deepfake platforms out there. So,
yes.
Which moves us on to our big topic. You and I both pulled a couple of articles. One of them is from TechCrunch about 11 Labs, the hot AI audio startup, confirms $180 million in Series C funding at a $3.3 billion valuation.
That's a big valuation for an audio tech company. That is pretty impressive, though not outside the norm for bigger AI startups. So the reason this has all caught investors' eye, I believe, is laid out pretty well in a report from Andreessen Horowitz about AI voice agents. So AI agents, if you haven't been paying attention to this stuff, and I don't blame you if you haven't, were kind of all the rage before DeepSeek came and kind of upset everyone's apple cart in the AI world. So AI agents are basically, I mean, chatbots would be the least sophisticated version of them, but there are ways we can have natural language conversations with AI systems that then yield, really quick results that help. So it almost feels like you're having a conversation. Or you can also, some of the agents are able to go and do things on your computer or your device for you. So that was sort of what Rabbit was selling. And while that product maybe didn't live up to its hype, you are able to do a lot more things with AI than just talk to it. So one interesting application of all this, of course, is things like call centers. And that's what the Andreessen Horowitz report really focuses on. But I wanted to sort of toss out to everybody here on the podcast and to Dmitri the thought, like, how will we use this in music? So we're starting to see more and more audio-based fan platforms. I'm thinking of things like Stationhead, and where audio notes and a back and forth with an artist are really important. I'm wondering where AI might come into play to scale up some of these experiences in ways that might still feel kind of satisfying for fans. It's not as exciting as maybe a live, that live feeling, but I'm sure there's much more creative ways to apply this as well. I'm wondering what you think about that, Dmitri.
I think it's a really good point that it might not be the obvious use cases for AI voice agents in music. Even in other media, there's new use cases popping up. A lot of that Andreessen Horowitz piece was about the early use cases for replacing phone calls and places with deep call centers. But there's also conversation in, I think, that article about 11 Labs of some of the use cases being like being able to talk to an article, right? They're doing stuff with The Atlantic. They're doing stuff with other media outlets where instead of just reading the article, you actually start to interact with what's going on there. And so I think your point of if there's an AI voice version of a musical celebrity, a musical act, it extends people's engagement with the artist and their creativity in a way that you can't do just by listening to a song or even just commenting on a video. It just makes that interactivity just so much more rich. Who controls it and who monetizes it, and whether they say something inappropriate when the artist never would have said it, or maybe they are too polite and they don't actually sound like Snoop Dogg or Kanye or
Nicki Minaj.
yeah, exactly. I think it's going to lead to a lot of creativity around that type of interaction with any kind of creative force, whether it's a musician or an athlete or anything like that as well.
We'll see if this goes the way of voice and smart speakers that were all the rage for a while there.
Oh yeah, or maybe it'll carry it further. Maybe those smart speakers will all of a sudden get new life because it feels like there's this more interactive thing rather than simply a voice interface to ask for things. You're actually interacting with it back and forth.
It'll be interesting to see what happens.
And I think these two articles also just point to the speed at which things are changing. There's always this thing in tech, Moore's Law, about the halving of prices or the doubling of semiconductors on a chip. This is really about AI efficiency. And the Andreessen Horowitz piece just points out that it's just in the last 6 months that lower latency and improved performance really get to these conversational models that actually work, that feel real, that people can engage with. All right, Trishra, this is great. Thanks so much, as always, with the rock, paper scanner and scanning the horizons. Had fun talking to you.
Yeah, it was a blast.
We've got to take a quick break, but right after this, we'll be back with our feature interview.
Join the Music Tectonics community on Zoom February 26th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. UK for the Marketing Toolbox for Music Tech Companies. Find out how tools like influencer marketing, public relations, crowdfunding, and pay-per-click ads work together for music and technology companies. We'll be joined by experts on these topics, so get your questions ready. Head over to musictectonics.com to register now and learn more about our free monthly online event series.
Now for our feature interview.
Welcome to the monthly Seismic Activity. This is a live recording for our Music Tectonics podcast mini-series, How to Scale Up. We've had several podcast episodes on how to start up, about finding product market fit, building a team, and the importance of music licensing and so forth. And we've done a couple of episodes on this idea of how to scale up. Once you've listened to all the how to start up, you can move on to how to scale up. And we've done some episodes with companies like Lyric Find and Station Head, who endured through the bootstrap startup years to become cash flow positive. So there's a whole great backlog of interviews and conversations that you can check out at the Music Tectonics podcast, everywhere you listen to podcasts. I'm Dmitri Vitsa. I'm the founder and CEO of Rock, Paper, Scissors, the PR and marketing firm that specializes in music tech and innovation, and also the co-host of the Music Tectonics podcast. So today's How to Scale Up event is on a topic rarely discussed in public forums: how I sold it. We have two amazing founders who exited their music tech startups by selling their companies. I'll ask them how they prepared to sell, how they found their suitors, what gets discussed in the valuation conversations, and how they felt about it all in the end. We should have time for Q&A at the end as well. Let me introduce our guests. Paul Anthony Troiano is an artist, entrepreneur, and investor. He's had several successful exits across the music tech, manufacturing, hospitality, creative agency, and commercial real estate sectors, including selling both Rumblefish and Spaceman guitar pedals, so some music tech companies there. Artistically, Paul has collaborated with Grammy award-winning artists, curated multi-million-dollar art experiences, and exhibited his interactive music installations at festivals across North America. Currently, Paul serves as the co-founder and president of Metronome, a provider of music rehearsal facilities to thousands of musicians, scaling from the Pacific Northwest across the United States. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And let me bring Jeff into the mix. Jeff Ponchick is the founder of Mogul, a business management platform that helps artists find all of their missing royalty and registration issues in under 10 minutes of setup. They then help artists fix and retrieve these missing royalties across all rights types. Prior to founding Mogul, Jeff was the CEO of Repost Network, which was acquired by SoundCloud in 2019. In his 3 years at the company there, he acted as the head of creator and launched the SoundCloud for Artists platform. Jeff, thank you for being here as well.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Jeff, let's jump in with you. I've got questions for both of you, but you can't talk at the same time. Jeff, what was Repost Network and how did you need to change it between when you founded it and when you sold it?
Sure. So Repost, how the story goes is it started out with a really simple, basic idea back in 2015, which was SoundCloud had rolled out monetization for the first time ever. So you could put an advertisement in front of a song and the SoundCloud channel could generate revenue. And I had been working in YouTube at the time in the YouTube music space and said, oh, this is very interesting. And what I found was that in the initial idea was that process for independent artists was incredibly difficult. It involved working with a company called Music Reports, which involved sending physical NOIs. And it was sort of a situation where if you were an artist, maybe with a major label or with like an advanced digital distributor, you could monetize on SoundCloud, but a lot of the independent sector of SoundCloud couldn't. So I saw that as an opportunity. And yeah, Mogul V1 was just a dashboard. An artist could log in, they could connect their SoundCloud channel, it would pull in your music, you give us the information, and then we would facilitate the process for you and say, your music will be monetized in a week. And so we started out with that. It was at a time when the revenue on SoundCloud wasn't very good. It was a very early kind of thing. And that meant that a lot of labels and distributors weren't taking it very seriously. So we did that. And then kind of from that version to when we sold, we always knew getting into this that we would be getting in front of an independent sector of musicians and artists. So we eventually pivoted into becoming a digital distributor. And this was around the time when United Masters, STEM, some of these other now larger distributors, we came up in that class of digital distribution products. And then with that, as you grow, you start to provide capital to artists, advances, things like that, marketing services, and just sort of expanding the core value offering. And that's what SoundCloud ended up acquiring.
Gotcha. Okay. In that answer, you said something about Mogul V1, but I think you meant Repost.
Oh, V1. Repost. Sorry. Yeah.
It made me think
I made the mental switch. I apologize.
Yeah. I think it made me think maybe Repost was Mogul V1, but I don't think it really is. It's a really different.
No, Repost. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Totally. Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to digging in more about that and about that sale. But I'm curious, Paul, what about you? What was Rumblefish and how did you need to change it between the time when you started it and when it was acquired?
We had a long, long road, and we did a lot of things. It started off as it was like an early digital only label, and then we morphed into music licensing for movies, TV shows, and video games. And then realized, that we were trying to get people online to license online versus everything was analog at the time, and built a large infrastructure. We bought musiclicensingstore.com and really tried to streamline everything, but behind an API and be on the forefront of pre-clearing music for uses, because it was really not that common, like 50 years ago when we started Rumblefish. We built this big catalog and a giant online music licensing store, spent a lot of money launching it, and you could hear the wind howling through it when we launched it, because people just did not want to license music online at that point. But our analog, like hand-to-hand combat, calling music supervisors and placing keys was going really well. So we're looking for micro licensing as a way to create a lot of volume. And that's when the business changed again. We were one of the first companies to help YouTube license music in a programmatic way, in terms of automatically replacing unlicensed tracks with licensed ones. So we helped them build tools. And so then we morphed into the micro licensing world, which we were on the kind of front edge of. And that's when our transaction volume went from 5,000-ish licenses a year to 500,000 licenses a day over the course of weeks. And like a lot of licenses. So we had to learn how to become a tech company and build product and learn how APIs and servers work and AWS and all that stuff. And while we were doing that, we were just looking for outlets for more volumes of licenses. So we started working with brands like Adidas and Red Bull, Google, that license a lot of music and get in trouble a lot for people not understanding how licensing works. And so then we started to morph into brand licensing. So licensing music directly to brands, giving them catalogs they can use on an unlimited basis. So just chasing the market. What we ended up, our North Star really was, we never wanted to own artist music, because I came up as a session drummer and as a composer, and I thought, why should you own my music? So we never wanted to own artist music. We always wanted to have a 50-50 split or better. We never wanted to cost anything for artists, and we wanted to make more money every year. I'm just trying to keep it simple. So as we navigated through how we evolved the business, we just used those bumper lanes. And then when CESAC and the private equity firm came along, it was because of our volume. So we were able to sell the company because we had something that could accelerate what the PROs were doing was pretty limited at the time, and they needed to diversify. So we were a way for them to diversify their tech and just upgrade. We were paying pretty quickly. I mean, like CD Baby pays, or was the first ones to pay on a weekly basis, right? And we were pretty close behind that in terms of how fast we would pay. And the PROs were paying on 18-month timelines. So there's a lot of advantages to upgrading their systems with what Rumblefish had, and then bringing Harry Fox into the mix. So we had CESAC, Harry Fox, and Rumblefish together. So that was like kind of a leap forward for that business.
So CD Baby was like a first big at scale customer for Rumblefish. So you're saying as they came on board, or I guess a customer. Were they a customer or were they a partner? I don't know what you call it.
Well, think of them as a supplier, right? So anything that comes in for catalog is a supplier, and then customers are licensing the music.
But the point is that they had a fast turnaround on that cash flow component of it. And so part of CESAC acquiring Rumblefish was to adapt to that speed of payout. Let me ask you both something. Paul, I'll start with you. Had you always thought you would sell Rumblefish? Like, did you go from being like a white glove sync placement company to a tech thing because you thought you could scale it, grow it, and sell it? Or was selling it not even part of the plan, and why or why not?
The reason why we started the company is because an artist I met in San Francisco when I was in my teenage years, Patrick Palomo, was being taken advantage of by his publisher. He was playing $200 dinners, and then he had to take a bus too because he couldn't afford a car. And so the passion behind Rumblefish was all about like helping artists own their stuff and making money for them, and finding unique ways to do that. So selling was nowhere on our radar. It wasn't really part of the calculus at all. It just became a thing later after we had raised money and gotten bigger and trying to see like how far we could scale. I think if you do a good job building your business and you're good at the fundamentals, then someone's going to want to buy you.
Yeah. What about you, Jeff? Had you always thought you would sell Repost Network?
Yeah, it was always a tricky dance with SoundCloud because we were so dependent on them when we started. And I also just personally love the platform. It's where I discovered musicians. And I think in the back of my head, there was always sort of something there that this would be the dream place for my company to maybe live. But the advice I always give to founders and people who are starting companies, never build to sell, right? Like try and be more purpose driven and figure out what about the problem you love to solve and go after that. For us, and maybe we'll get into it in a second, like there were actually 2 attempts to buy us by SoundCloud. One failed and went through. It was kind of always after our first year or two, like a topic, at least always in the background for us. But we ended up choosing to sell because there was a huge shift in the market, in the sense that there was one summer, I think back in 2018, where Spotify was part of a large private equity deal that invested into DistroKid. And then Apple Music acquired Platoon, which was another one of our competitors. And so when that happened, my phone started ringing off the hook from other platforms, other major labels, other companies who just thought, I think for a little while, a little moment in time, that if you were a digital distributor over a certain size, maybe it made sense to acquire it and build that functionality into like a bigger company or platform. And so, our decision to sell came from our realization that if these people were calling us about investment in M&A, then they were sure as hell talking to our competitors too. So, we only raised $500K and then we were profitable. So we weren't dependent on venture capital, but we had to make the decision to either raise money or sell. So we actually went out and ran a process for that reason. And that was sort of the impetus for us.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. But it sounds like in both cases, it wasn't so much that you were approaching buyers. They just started talking to you, and because of your success. Jeff, I want to ask you just a little follow-up. You said you discourage founders from ever building to sell. So can you say a little bit more about why that is?
I think it just shows that maybe you're in it for the wrong reasons. And this just might be my personal opinion.
Totally,
I'm sure there are
100%.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think Paul agrees. Thank you. So it's like you should be, especially in the early stage or even, partially the growth stage, you should be so obsessed about customer satisfaction and solving the problem. And that should take up 110% of your time. Once you start going out and trying to sell, it's going to be a very time-consuming process. Your pitch is going to change, and people are going to sense, I think, or they can tell the sense in your urgency isn't really to solve the customer's issues. It's to just make a quick buy. I don't know, Paul, if you have an opinion, but that's how I think about it. It's you build a better business if you care truly about what you're doing and you put that first, as sort of corny as that sounds.
No, yeah. If you're obsessed, just like you said, if you're obsessed about doing right by your customer or fulfilling a vision that you have, someone will be just as excited about buying you because you did a great job doing that. And then you can choose if you want to be bought, because the best time to sell the company is when you don't want to or don't need to. You create a lot more gravity as an organization to like acquire talent and retain customers and keep your system happy when like your passion's really locked in. There's some I think the only exception to that is there's some obvious holes in the market for, I think, some tech companies where like maybe you have an app or a solution where like there's a short 12-month, 18-month window if you build a thing to fix a problem to sell. I think that's a different game.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you both about so what happens next? Somebody approaches you or you approach somebody, what happens next? But Jeff, you mentioned that there were 2 attempted acquisitions by SoundCloud. Can you talk a little bit about the first one and why it didn't work out?
Yeah, I can. And I also want to just set the disclaimer, if that's okay. So,
Absolutely.
When I sold to SoundCloud, it was a great outcome for me personally, for my team. I only had to stick around for a year. I stuck around for 3. It was hard, but I love the experience and I love the people. Carrie Trainer, who was the CEO of SoundCloud when they bought my company as an investor in my new company. And I love the team and all of that. And the reason I say that is because when you kind of get into the PTSD and what happened with the deal, it's easy to go into a us versus them kind of mindset. And so if any of that flips out, I just want to set that disclaimer that holistically it was a great thing, but I'll try and be as honest with you all as I can. So yeah, with the SoundCloud side of things, the way the story went, as I recall it, was SoundCloud almost went under in 2017. They almost ran out of cash. And two merchant banks called Rain and Temasek, which is this sovereign wealth fund of Singapore, came in and bought SoundCloud for very cheap. And basically they brought in a new CEO and a new COO who were the people who ran Vimeo to basically take over from the original founders. And when that happened, immediately they were like, who are these Repost people? I've heard of Universal Music. I've heard of Empire, right? I've never heard of this Repost company. Why do they have such a large market share on our platform of monetization? And so I flew out to New York and I pitched them on this idea, on this business partnership, which was, we take artists from SoundCloud, we help them monetize, and we put them on Spotify and Apple. And here's the revenue we make. And here's how much more revenue we make than you do per user of artists in a certain cohort. And so I said, what if we did digital distribution for you guys in partnership? And I think I did a decent job of selling them on that idea and that concept. And they kind of came back and said, well, maybe it'd be better if we just bought you. So I said, oh my gosh, this is great. I'm going to tell the full story. This is great. This could be a dream come true. This could be such a great fit. It's something that's never happened in the music industry before. So we start going down the path and we start doing diligence, but we're not talking about valuation, right? And it's fine. But we got to a point where we were kind of letting them peek under the hood as to how the car was made, but we weren't like having like the right conversations. So eventually when I pushed on valuation, we couldn't agree on a right kind of range for exit price. And we mutually, I would say, decided to walk away. Now, the thing that happened, and I feel like I could write a book at this point on platform development, is a year later, I get a call from my rep at SoundCloud, and they say, hey, tomorrow there's going to be some press coming out. We're launching digital distribution in the platform, right? So they had spun up a team internally to not copy us, but I would say take the same strategy, and they launched it. And that was a really, as a founder, when that happens with the company that's your core sales funnel happens, that's a very challenging thing to work through with the team, with how to compete. But that's another story. I don't know if we want to go into it. But to answer your question, Dmitri,
what you're saying, Jeff, is the service that you offered was kind of an add-on to SoundCloud. When SoundCloud started to offer something similar directly, it kind of challenged your value proposition.
It did. Yeah. I guess it was a little also, in a weird backhanded way, it felt kind of good. It meant that I was sort of onto something. But yeah, that was a really tough moment. But yeah, you have to come out of it and you have to just stay ahead. And I think for us, when we sort of rallied the team around what to do next, we had to lean into our strengths. We were a small, scrappy team. We could move faster than SoundCloud, believe it or not, at the time. And we had to just compete on features and value prop and offering, even though they were kind of able to compete with us on price. And that's what we did. We rolled out features like split pay, and we started providing capital and advances. And in a weird way, it forced us to get like 10x better. And I think within that year, actually to your point, within the year of them launching that and a year later, we actually doubled the size of our business. It was a huge fire under our asses.
That's a great outcome, right? It looked like, hey, they could possibly shut you down, but instead you just grew. And just to be clear, in case people are new to this idea about distribution, when you mentioned split pay, the idea there is that you could pay out multiple creators that collaborated on a song efficiently versus just paying out one entity and then they have to go and work on it on their own. Okay.
Yeah. And the valuable part to that too is it's a great user acquisition strategy too. Because all the people you're paying out now have accounts of your platform, and
that's a great point. Very good tip right there. Okay, I want to get back to Rumblefish, but real quick, Jeff, tell us a version of what happened. How did you get the second offer to buy your company after that experience?
Yeah, so kind of to what I said earlier, then there was sort of this. It felt like there was going to be some market roll up or just investment in our space, and we wanted to take advantage of that wave coming in. We hired a banker for the process. So we just hired someone to represent us because I was historically terrible at fundraising. I'm a little better now. But yeah, we hired a banker and we went out not necessarily trying to sell, might have been to a strategic partnership or just investment. And we included SoundCloud again in those conversations, and they came back to the table because, and this is just my opinion, the direct distribution offering that they launched, it didn't see the success that they had hoped in the marketplace, and they wanted effectively our DNA in the company to run that.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. They're probably like, who else is sniffing around to buy Repost that already knows so much about SoundCloud?
Yeah.
Where could all those people go if they don't stick at SoundCloud as well? Yes. Okay, cool. All right. This has been super cool to dive a little more deeply into that side of the story. But let's talk about Rumblefish. How did CESAC show up and what happened from there?
Yeah, there was an unsolicited offer from a party that out of nowhere. And so we took that offer, hired a banker as well, someone who's really familiar with the space, who'd done other transactions with similar companies in like digital music tech, and then ran a process and got some competitive bids because in just kind of watching other entrepreneurs go through the dance, it's a huge distraction. And you always do better in a competitive process. And, people sell for different reasons. Fortunately, we were selling because, we were on a trajectory that people wanted to be a part of. But we made sure that it was a competitive process, because if you just go with a single buyer, or you go through, kind of diligent situations like Jeff was talking about, where people are really kind of just snooping with, you're not exactly sure what their intentions are. And we had some of those situations kind of show up for us too. It can just be a huge distraction to running your company. And so myself and the board were just like, okay, we have a buyer. They gave us a number that surprised us. So what if we just tested the market and turned the banker loose, gave them some materials, and just focused on the business and to the best of our ability? So that's what got us eventually down the road towards selling to CESAC.
So when you say surprised, you mean it was higher than you expected?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're like, but could we get more?
Oh, well, it's kind of like in a competitive process, it's really interesting because your pitch to each buyer is a little bit different, right? Because they want you for a specific reason. They either want your team or your tech, or you can help them. They have customers that you can bring something to, or vice versa. Yeah. There's like, what's the value proposition that is, if you were the buyer, how would you be looking at this, and where are you placing the value? So we were trying to find out, okay, if this unsolicited offer values us in this way, we hadn't even considered that being valuable in our company. So what else are we not looking at? It's a lot easier to go around the block with a banker when you say, hey, we've had inbound interest and the board has asked us to look into this, versus saying, hey, we're for sale. No one's interested yet, but want to buy us? Because then it seems everyone's thought is, what's wrong? What's wrong over there? Because if it's going so great, why are you selling? So,
okay. Yeah. So what does happen in the valuation conversations? I'm sure I can see from our chat, there's a lot of startup founders here in the room today listening to this live seismic activity. And you podcast listeners, you should be signing up to this because you could be involved in the chats as well. But I'm sure many of them are just so curious about, like, how do you decide how much your company is worth? And how do investment bankers talk about that? And how do potential suitors talk about that? Jeff, what can you share with us about those? I mean, you went through 2 rounds with Repost. In the first one, pretty much you couldn't come to terms, it sounds like. How do you figure this stuff out? What should these other founders be thinking about? What should they have at the ready, et cetera?
Yeah. So for founders who are listening or anyone interested, there's a book called The Magic Box Paradigm that I'd recommend reading or listening to. That I remember when I was going through this process, it was recommended to me and it was really helpful. And sort of to back up what Paul said, right, is you have to figure out what's the reason they're buying you for, right? Is this really an acqui-hire, right? Is the tech going to create some type of exponential growth in another way, right? And you kind of got to, I think, latch to that and try and model and figure out really, like, diligently, get in the spreadsheets and model it out, how this could be the biggest business possible. The thing that you have to be careful about, though, is if you set those expectations, you're going to be held to those expectations. And then post-transaction, there could be things like earnouts and stuff like that you have to be mindful of. But yeah, most companies are usually valued off of their gross revenue, their net revenue, or their EBITDA. But yeah, to reiterate what Paul said, I think it's about just understanding what's the reason for the acquisition, what value are you providing, and how do you try and think about that future value.
Yeah. Paul, what about you? What happens in your valuation conversations? And I think you've maybe sold more than one company as well. You're welcome to talk about other ones or been involved with the buying of companies as well.
So as on being on both sides of the fence, the best outcome, for the seller and the buyer obviously is different in that you want the best outcome after the sale too, right? So you want everything to work later. But I like to focus on the unfair advantage, right? So if I can give you an unfair advantage, I can detach you as a seller. If I can give you an unfair advantage in your business by adding my company and what we have to offer, then I can detach you from the traditional valuation methods. But it's true. It's either it's a multiple of something, top line, net income, EBITDA, something. If you keep them in reality. So I like to detach the buyer from reality and say, I give you this unfair advantage, and it's based on your metrics and your growth and your sales. So if you have, like, for example, we sold Spaceman, the effects pedal company, to Eastwood Guitars. Their guitars, we were guitar pedals, and they had more customers than we did. We had more dealers than they did, right? And so there was some complementary elements there. So multiple of our revenue was irrelevant when you could say what percentage of your customers could buy our pedals. So I like to anchor it on the unfair advantage we give them. I'm like, oh, well, you have 1 million customers or 2 million or however many million of customers you have, and X percent of them buy a pedal. That's our valuation, right? So as an example, so the unfair advantage anchoring somewhere else gives you a different way to approach it. And then also having a competitive process, because you don't have to convince all of them there's an unfair advantage. If you can convince one of them there's an unfair advantage, then when your banker gives guidance before bids come in, if it's competitive, they say, well, we've got one party that's in this range. Submit your bids by this date. And so that helps you anchor it because you have someone that's really enthusiastic. Of course, you have to survive diligence. And as Jeff probably knows, like every deal dies 3 times, like no matter what, it's going to die. It's going to feel terrible at least 3 times and probably go away. And so just saddle up emotionally, like if you ever had like a really emotional purchase, like trying to buy your dream house and like you, or a guitar or something you really wanted and you almost had it, but didn't get it, like get ready for that feeling.
Yeah, it's brutal. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff, you'd mentioned that valuation might be structured around gross revenue, net revenue, or EBITDA. EBITDA for any newcomers here is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Why would that come into play versus just gross revenue? Is it because there's complexity in the books in terms of that type of stuff, like depreciation?
Just trying to get to like, what's your real take home?
Yeah.
And EBITDA is more reflective in some businesses than others of what's really going on, depending on like how much depreciation and amortization is happening. If you are a rev share business and you're taking home 10-15%, a multiple of top line of gross revenues is insanity.
Yeah. I'm glad you pointed that out. Yeah. What other considerations come up when you're buying or selling a company? Besides, we talked a little bit about the emotions. We talked about the valuation. We talked about the strategic value a little bit, especially when you talk about this competitive advantage. What else comes up that maybe our listeners haven't thought about yet since they haven't experienced it? Paul, go ahead.
There's reasons why companies are being sold, right? And like if I could categorize them, there's like you're a rocket ship and people want to get on. Right? You've plateaued and you're kind of out of options, or everyone in your space is getting gobbled up and you're like, okay, everyone's raising $50 million or $10 million and I'm not. So what do we do? You want to share the wealth with the team, so it's like, hey, I never want to sell this thing. I want to do an ESOP, an employee stock option purchase. And the team's going to own the business and it's going to be a monetization event for the owner. You're tired. You're like, this sucks. Get me out of here. or you're kind of out of moves and you're desperate, so it's get fired. So I think selling a company, it's easy to say selling a company. Everyone usually thinks about the dream situation where you're skipping down the street, you're making a bunch of money, everything's going great. But there's a lot of reasons why companies sell. And so I think as a founder, just be real with yourself. Like, if you're in one of those situations, find the right outcome for you, you know? And if you're a buyer, then same thing. So,
Jeff, anything else that comes to mind for you that are considerations beyond what we've talked about so far?
Yeah, I think the emotions play a really big part of it. I think selling to SoundCloud was maybe one of the hardest things I've ever gone through. We had a particularly long sale process. It took over 9 months from LOI to close. And yeah, to the point, a huge part of it is just managing your emotions through it and keeping level-headed, which I remember being incredibly hard for me. I think other considerations to have, we've talked a little bit about why to sell. I think there's also an interesting dynamic that happens, especially in the music industry, is sales also happen, but a lot of them aren't really like good outcomes. And that's something where it's like, oh, I sold my company to Warner Music Group, and that's great, but you know, what did that look like? And so I think there is sort of an interesting dynamic, at least maybe not just in the music industry, but in general, where people are going around saying, I sold my company and I did this, but you know, was there really anything there?
Are you saying they might not have had a successful sale in terms of like maybe they didn't make any money, they might have lost money, or maybe the company got gobbled up and no longer was able to fulfill the mission, it got used for parts or something like that?
Yeah, there's a lot of acquisitions in the space are like people finding landings for maybe their team when the writing's been on the wall, and closing up shop was probably, it was either like close up shop or kind of like get your employees a new job kind of thing. Right. And kind of make it look like that.
Move, right?
Yeah. The acqui-hire. That's like I see a lot of that happening. So I think that's something to like, just be mindful of and think about when you see these things happening.
Yeah. You know, I've got another question for you that's kind of related. I'm curious, did either of you have a buyer that gave you any specific assignments or requirements or criteria that you had to accomplish before they would acquire you or close the deal? Was there a sort of like, oh, you're almost there at this metric, or you're going to have to cut? We see a lot of times before people sell, they have to cut expenses, which sometimes means reducing their team size, or, you know, alter your roadmap and reach a certain benchmark before we'll take it, stuff like that. Have you seen anything? Did you experience anything like that? Or can you comment on that from other experiences you've seen? Jeff?
So I personally did not have to do anything while we were negotiating the actual like stock purchase agreement. But there is this interesting thing that happens so everyone signs the deal, there's a post-close period. It's like a couple weeks of like getting tax documents from investors and, you know, things like that. And there were a couple things I think in our deal that we had to accomplish. Otherwise, they could roll some stuff back. Like, in particular, you know, I think we had to make it to 80% of our team. When you sell your company, you kind of shut down the existing entity and then you have to rehire. At least we had to rehire everyone to SoundCloud. And we had to get 80% of our staff to agree to move over. And we obviously found ways to incentivize them to do that. And everyone was, I think we had 100%. I think one person didn't come over, but you know, there was some stuff like that in that period. And I remember that period being so scary because like, you're just kind of sitting on pins and needles. Like, it's like we had announced we had sold, and then you're waiting 2 weeks to like kind of wrap everything up. And it's, if someone comes out of nowhere and just like sues us, like for whatever reason, like a made up reason, like they could just walk and not fund the money and stuff like that. So I remember that being like kind of a very like interesting period of time. And I don't know how unique that is to my experience, but there was that bring over 80%. The 80% of the team has to come over. Otherwise, we can roll back some of the value on this.
Yeah, meeting the closing conditions is really nerve-wracking because it's done, but it's not done. And the consequences are really high.
Yeah.
Know? Oh, it's lots of stuff. It's, you know, getting assignments on agreements, key assignments on an agreement. It's like, oh, your biggest customer has to sign their agreements to this new entity. And it has a non-assignment clause.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Can you get them to do it? And oh, by the way, you got to tell them that you're selling before you've sold. And if they don't like who you're selling to, they could say no, and the whole deal's done. You know, it's just a bunch of like if-then stuff that you think will work, but you don't really know the answer till you ask, and you can't ask until you know the buyer. is buying.
Yeah.
Because so it's just think of a 100 item list long. It's a bunch of catch-22s.
It's like a dominoes that have to knock each other over.
Yeah, we had another one.
It out.
We had another one too, which was like, we didn't know how like Spotify and YouTube and Apple Music and all of these key partners that we distributed into would feel about us joining SoundCloud, and then SoundCloud, who is a competitor to them on the listener side, would be distributing into their platforms. And yeah, that was my version of the like, I have no clue how this is going to go.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Paul.
Oh, yeah, just one other thing in terms of value for any of the founders out there is there's a lot of value beyond purchase price. Your employment agreement is really important. Anything you think the buyer doesn't need, don't put it in the deal. Like there's things you can take if they're like, technically you own them personally, or, like don't sell them everything, just sell it to them. Like if you own a bunch of URLs, or if you have some other assets that you never put in the name of the company, don't just laundry list it all unless it's valuable. Protect your team, because you have a chance to like put a little bit of a protection blanket around your team before the deal's done, and after the deal's done, you definitely don't. And then there's a lot of get really good at understanding the contracts, because there's lots of things in terms of what they'll hold back, if they're valuing cash or not. So just like, take the time to study up and understand how that stuff works, because it's disappointing after the deal when you find out that things you thought were included weren't.
Yeah. I've got one more question for you guys. Paul, if you had to do it over again, what would you change?
As soon as I decided I wanted to sell the company, it took us 3 years to do it. And so it was amazing to me that when I was focused on it, how fast it happened. It's kind of like Jeff's story about someone lights a fire under your ass and all of a sudden your company's twice the size in 12 months. So don't underestimate how capable you can become if you're actually really focused on something.
So are you saying you would have started sooner? Is that partly what you're saying?
It's just my observation. Rumblefish I sold first. Other businesses that I sold, it's like, do we want to sell it? Let's think about it. Yes, we do. And you just march to do that, Or do we want to buy it? Yes, we do. And just be really definitive about it, Don't be wishy-washy about selling your company, because it'll trash your team. Everyone's confused. Will I have a job? What's going on? Like, you don't know. Like, it's worth like taking some time getting clear on, and either choose to do it or don't. I was too wishy-washy on it.
Actually, can I ask a question, Paul?
Yeah.
Did you tell your team that you were selling? Like, was everyone, at what point did you tell the team?
Yeah. So in all the cases, we didn't tell them until the contract was signed. And our smokescreen for it, which is like, you feel bad doing it, but I really was doing it for their mental well-being, was we're raising money or we're getting a bank loan or whatever, because you can't hide the fact that like all these freaking people are showing up and kicking the tires and looking at all your shit. You can't. There's no way to hide it, because you're asking your team for all the information that you need to get ready for diligence or the process. So it's impossible to hide.
Yeah, and we did the exact same thing, actually.
Yeah, raising money, or we're doing an audit, or we're doing preemptive diligence. But if you say we're selling the company, like everyone's LinkedIn resumes are updated like 15 minutes later.
Yep. And
it's hard to keep them focused on what you're doing. And if it falls apart, then you're just playing with people's emotions. So I try to take that burden on with either myself or with the leadership team. Not put that on the team. It's not fair to them. They shouldn't be worried about that.
I agree.
Jeff, what about you? If you had to do it over again, what would you change with Repost Network?
There's what I know now that I didn't know then. I guess I think there's some things. There's things like there's no way I could have known this, but COVID, for example, digital distribution businesses did really well, right? So there were like tons of people making music, tons more people listening to more music. So I think a lot of if we had not sold and stuck with it a little bit longer, I think we could have, due to these extenuating black swan situations, maybe could have done better. But ultimately, I have very few regrets, little to none. I think I was so interested to learn how a DSP music platform worked. I got to, sell my business. It was life-changing for me. And it was interesting, and I grew as a manager and as a leader. And yeah, I have very little, next to no regrets. And the fact of it that was emotional and difficult and hard, I think it only just, made me better.
Yeah, great. This has been so great to hear from you guys and get this expertise. I'm not sure I've ever heard startup founders who have sold their companies talk this transparently and share so much information with peers who are maybe not quite as far along in the journey, or maybe they're far along in the journey and they're dying to get out. But really appreciate that. Jeff Ponchick, Anthony Troiano, this has been fantastic. It's been how I sold it in the How to Scale Up portion of the Music Tectonics series. And guys, thanks so much for being here. I have a couple of announcements, but I wanted to thank you for being here, Paul and Jeff. This has been great.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, you guys.
And if you enjoyed this and got something out of it, we have many more How to Scale Up and How to Start Up episodes on the Music Tectonics podcast. So check that out on any podcast platform, including one with Sunjen Young, who Paul just mentioned. We've got a How to Start Up episode. She's going to be speaking with me at South by Southwest in a special How to Start Up South by panel. So come out for that as well. And as I told at the beginning of the event, be sure to register for our next online event, the Marketing Toolbox for Music Tech Companies. It's taking place on February 26th, same time, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, where we'll have several experts on marketing music tech companies. Please come out to the Music Tectonics Conference, November 4th to 6th, 2025 in Santa Monica. It's a blast. It's this all the time in the sun, on the beach, with a carousel, lots of great musical demonstrations and music tech startups demoing and so forth. So come to the in-person thing. You'll love it. And if you need help with any PR or marketing strategy, let me know or reach out to jade@rockpaperscissors.biz. We'd love to do some strategy work with you and get you onto our roster as well. Thanks everybody for joining. That's it for our seismic activity. We'll see you next month.
Startup Spotlight.
Hi, this is Sako from Riff Raff. We built the Riff Raff mobile app to increase music practice amongst hobby musicians by connecting and collaborating on song covers. The way we do that is by offering an app for iOS or Android where hobby musicians can search and select any song that was ever released, select their instruments or vocals, get direct access to tutorials, tabs, sheet music, and then simply record their performance at home with their phone's camera, and also sharing the gear they used. They will receive kudos and comments from other musicians, connect with fans of the same artist or music genre, and score points, climb the charts, unlock badges, complete challenges. It's like a Strava and Duolingo for musicians. We also use theme separation to mix together several performances of the same song covers, giving the users a rewarding collaborative experience. It's our killer feature, and sometimes the actual artist might make a cameo appearance. I first came across this problem when, being a hobby musician and music nerd myself for decades, I stopped playing and started losing interest in music discoveries for several years. And having founded several digital agencies, I started researching the problem. The thing that nobody else was doing is to focus on song covers, which brings fan culture and community, making it exciting and social again to practice an instrument or sing long after you've learned the basics. Everybody is focused on early learning or selling the dream of a professional career, while 9 out of 10 hobby musicians actually give up playing. We create value to instrument brands and artists by reducing the attrition rate and extending the customer lifetime value of hobby musicians. And we create new positive superfan experiences, opportunities, and monetizations for artists, band members, and labels. I am especially proud of having several of our users resume instrument playing after a hiatus of several years. This is priceless. Some of the results so far have included having over 1,000 users from 30 plus countries in our beta app, and currently discussing a collaboration with the drummer of the UK alternative band Therapy ? A band I have admired since my early days attending rock festivals in Europe. My biggest challenge has been designing a business model that is beneficial to all the parties involved, the hobby musicians, the artists and labels, and the brand instruments. But we nailed it, and now we have the attention of these industries. The next thing we're going to do is to have every instrument owner and singer around the world rely on Riff Raff to keep having pleasure practicing the songs they love, discover music, and stay connected with the beautiful people.
Now give me a PR tip.
Hey there, everyone. This is Emily Francis. I'm a senior publicist at Rock, Paper, Scissors. And today I would like to share with you the importance of embargo pitching. So I think when most people think of PR in a general sense, they think of having a press release that is going to be distributed to as many media contacts as possible. And this is obviously part of the process. But one thing that we like to do that I think really maximizes the potential for the best coverage that you can possibly get is something we call embargo pitching. So let's say your press release is going to be distributed February 4th at 9 a.m. What we would do is about 2 weeks before that, or as long as we can have, honestly, the longer the better, we would start reaching out to top tier dream journalists who you would love to cover your announcement. Maybe you want it to be in TechCrunch. Maybe you want Wall Street Journal. Maybe you want Billboard. Whatever it is, we'll make a list of those folks that would just be absolutely stellar, and we'll reach out to them ahead of time. These people get PR pitch emails, hundreds of them a week, right? If not more. So having some time ahead of when the press release is going to be widely distributed to reach out to those top tier folks, follow up a couple times, feed them some new nuggets of information to try to pique their interest, even offering things like exclusives if that's the route you really want to go. Having that time ahead of the press release distribution date is super effective for maximizing the potential that they're going to see your email, they're going to be interested, maybe they want to interview your client, whatever the case is. It's a really effective process to go through to maximize the potential for coverage in those top tier outlets. I hope you find that useful for your future PR endeavors. Once again, my name's Emily Francis, and thank you for tuning in to today's Music Tectonics podcast.
Thanks for listening to Music Tectonics. If you like what you hear, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We have new episodes for you every week. Did you know we do free monthly online events that you, our lovely podcast listeners, can join? Find out more at musictectonics.com. And while you're there, look for the latest about our annual conference and sign up for our newsletter to get updates. Everything we do explores the seismic shifts that shake up music and technology, the way the Earth's tectonic plates cause quakes and make mountains. Connect with Music Tectonics on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. That's my favorite platform. Connect with me, Dmitri Vitsa, if you can spell it. We'll be back again next week, if not sooner.
You're listening to Music Tectonics.